Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Turner with Batcat Media Group, which is home to my business coaching program, Dream Plan Start Grow. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how I started this business because it's kind of an interesting story. And let me make one shift on something. It's kind of an interesting story because I would never have pegged myself to start a business. If you had asked me this 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't even known I could have started a business. Who, me? I could start a business. It wasn't on my radar, wasn't something I grew up with. My mother didn't work. My father worked as a financial planner. That's how I grew up. I didn't have friends that were doing it. I didn't think about it. But instead, I started a business 10 years ago. And really, I started because I was looking for a bigger challenge. And I grew up as an athlete. And for people I know that were athletes growing up, and I played tennis, and I grew up playing national scene of tennis in the United States. And then I went on to play Division I college tennis on scholarship. And for people that did the athletic realm, whether you played on a team, whether you did tennis, whatever you did, sometimes we think differently. And I'm not saying that's all that thinks differently, but I find that athletes in general, of course, we have a lawnmower out here, but athletes in general think a little bit differently from the standpoint they're very focused, they're very driven, they're often type A personalities, not all of them, but the people I knew, more type A personalities, sometimes perfectionistic. And we really have that drive to continue doing better, setting new goals, improving. We have to, because that's how you get better in athletics, right? We get better because we go from point A to point B and then continue to go up that ladder. I mean, I started at age 7 and never had picked up a racket before. And I retired from tennis at age 21. And that was my career, essentially. School was there, but I was paid to play tennis from the standpoint that I was on college scholarship for Division I school in the Big Ten. So I got a lot of those traits. So when I went into the work world, my first job, so I taught tennis in high school because that's where I could get a job just for a temporary, 3 months, 3 months. But actually in college, I taught tennis. But when I got out of college and even my last year in school, I ended up getting a full-time job because I actually left tennis. I got a full-time job and I was always looking at like how to improve things, but I could only do so much to do it because, when you're working for someone else, you're in this box essentially. Here's your job description. Here's what you can do. So you can excel at your position. Don't get me wrong, which you should. But I was in social services and I ran into just roadblocks on what I could actually do, which frustrated me. Because in social services, everything is funded via grants and things like that, since it's a nonprofit. And you can only work within that funding, like whatever the funding was for. And I was in domestic violence, so I worked for a battered women's shelter when I first went into social services. I thought I wanted to give back to people because I like, being able to help people that need that help, need that edge up. And I did that for a while. And I finished that job after I finished college. And then I switched to a second job in social services because I wanted to experience different aspects of the field. So I switched to a different job and I worked in another social service field, working with adolescent teenage girls that were in kind of intermittent foster care. So they were in a short-term shelter. So I worked in the short-term shelter. And I learned very quickly that I didn't particularly love how my boss ran certain things. And not to say I was the be all end all, because I didn't have a lot of job experience, but there were things that I didn't really like and I didn't appreciate. So I didn't stay in that job very long. And then I went to another social service job and figured out that maybe that wasn't the field for me because I felt like I was locked in and I couldn't make the bigger difference. So I chose not to stay in that field. I went into financial planning, not as a financial planner, but as a office person within that industry, and knew I wouldn't stay there because I got to the point, I learn what the business is, and then I get bored. I learn whatever I can learn. And with that, I was like, what do I do here? Can I move up in this field? So I really couldn't move up past what I was doing. I mean, a little bit from what I was doing, but I could have been a trader. That interested me because I thought that would be interesting. But then I didn't want to move to where I needed to move to be able to do that. So there were pieces that I chose not to do. And then I finally ended up back in tennis, teaching tennis. And that's my longest stint. So I was teaching tennis for about 14 years, but I always did like an administrative job with it because I would get bored. If I was just doing administration in tennis, I would get bored. If I was just doing tennis itself, I would get bored. So I always needed something more. And I've always found that I need something more than just that one thing. And that's really probably why business ownership is so good for me, because it fulfills a lot of those pieces, because I certainly don't get bored. And if there's something I don't like to do, I farm it out to an expert that can do it much more efficiently and better than I. And that's great. But I don't get bored because there's always something new. There's always a new goal. So kind of like athletics, there's always that new step. There's always that next goal, that next higher reach. Maybe you're implementing or launching a new service. Maybe you have to build out a course. There's so many different things in business that are fulfilled, kind of like being that athlete all those years ago. And I still consider myself an athlete, even though maybe I don't go run 5Ks or marathons or anything like that. I still consider myself an athlete. And today I find that, that parallel is so striking for me because it's so true. I have that drive. I have that focus. I am that type A person. I've pushed back on the perfection because that's a dangerous trait, I find, because ultimately when you're perfectionistic in anything, it can actually bring you down because no one's going to hit perfection. Doesn't matter what it is. You may have a moment where you make the perfect choice, but no one's going to hit that perfection. But business ownership answers all those questions of like, hey, I was bored in these jobs. And I literally left different jobs because I was bored and I wanted a bigger challenge. And I didn't know how to get that challenge. Again, I would never have been a business owner. I literally started going to women's networking groups. They were more like empowering and things like that. And that's how I started hearing about being an entrepreneur and starting a business. That's how I started. Again, I didn't even go thinking I was going to start a business. I was just trying to find my next steps. I was trying to figure out, like, once I ended up going back to grad school when I was teaching tennis and getting my MBA. And then I thought I might go back into social services and get that degree as well. But then I chose not to go that direction. But I was bored and I wanted a bigger challenge. When I left jobs, it was because I was bored and I wanted something more. I don't know if anyone else that's listening to this can relate to being bored in a job and it not being challenging enough. Or maybe you bring a great idea and it's shut down, or maybe they don't want ideas from people, at your level or something like that. Maybe you're not the CEO. Maybe you're working your way up in a company and you have to work your way up a certain way depending on what the culture of that company is. So when I got bored and I started going to these women's networking groups, I started thinking of different possibilities and really believing that, hey, I could start this. Now, what they didn't tell me in these networking groups is it's not easy to run a business. I'm at my 10-year mark. It is not easy. I've had sleepless nights. I've been stressed. I've been frustrated by it. All those things that I didn't get that support early on. And had I done it differently today, if hindsight's 20/20, as they always say, I would have done it differently. And that's really why one of the reasons I'm passionate about working with people that are startups today from the coaching side and even the branding side, because I want them to have that stronger foundation so they don't go through those same challenges. I want them to get everything I got out of business ownership, so I'm not bored. I want them to get those things, but I also want them to realize that, hey, it's hard work, but it's doable. And if you have the right foundation, it's easier to do. And you won't have those sleepless nights, and you will go further faster, depending on what your industry is, than maybe I've gone. And I've done well, don't get me wrong, but I feel if I'd had that foundation early on, and that's what they really didn't tell me. So I got the idealistic, hey, anyone can start a business. Here's what you do, and it's not, I mean, here's what you do. Like you incorporate, you get a logo, like that kind of, here's what you do, which has zero to do with the coaching side. It's more just like logistics of here's what you do, which are all necessary pieces. But what I didn't get was, hey, you need to put certain processes and foundations in place to get to that next level. So you're not focusing so much on the business that you're forgetting about your family or your friends or whatever else, and you're stressed. And that's really what I want to emphasize today is, while I got bored and I started a business. So initially I started my own little small company thinking I love to do nature photography. That's a hobby of mine. And I like to incorporate it within, feel good phrases and things like that. So I was doing a little bit of that with the idea of maybe doing something in the coaching world. And I realized very quickly, like, okay, there's a lot of people that attempt to do something like this. And I'm not saying it's not doable, but it was a longer road. And I realized very quickly that maybe I didn't have the foundation I needed to do that. And then when I met the business partner that I started this company with many years ago, she had owned a business before. So she had some of that foundation, which was critical. And when we started as a consulting company. So we had some of those foundational pieces because she had been there and done that before. But again, I feel that if I had understood things from the get-go early on, it would have really helped accelerate my journey even quicker. So I always, today, when I work with my clients in that coaching realm of someone that wants to start a business or someone that's maybe newer to business, I really emphasize, hey, it's doable and you can build this. And I'm not ever going to say entrepreneurship doesn't have any stress to it, because that would be a lie, but it's doable. And there's ways to put those foundational steps in place and go up that ladder. And you're always going to zigzag a little bit and go up and down and things like that. That's just life. That's not just business. That's life in general. But there's ways to do it without getting too stressed. So if you are listening to this video and if you're thinking about starting a business, please talk to me. Please let me at least speak to you. And if you are interested, I am hosting a free webinar in a couple of weeks, actually 2 weeks from today, on the 26th of September. And you can register for that at yourdreambusinessplan.com. But the free webinar is going to really talk about how do you create a business so you're not giving up other aspects of your life. Because the one thing that, again, they don't tell you, like, anyone can create a business, but then if you have a family with kids, or if you have other, a lot of friends that you're used to going out with after work, business ownership isn't just, hey, it's 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and that's it. No, I mean, I think of ideas late at night, early morning. I'm like better in the early morning. And so it's not always being on, but it's always being open to the opportunities that may come into your head, those ideas, those, maybe you meet somebody and you're like, hey, that person might be the right fit over here, So it's always being open to those opportunities. And in that sense, you are a little bit more on than off. So I hope that's been helpful today. But really think about if you want to start a business. And again, I started a business. I was bored. Business ownership is not boring by any stretch of the imagination. It's really helped me hone in on what's important to me and how to grow a solid business without being bored. Because for me, there's nothing worse than being bored from the standpoint of a job working for somebody else. Again, my name is Allison Turner. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you again later this week. Bye for now.